Hey guys, tonight we drift into one of the darkest corridors of human history, tracing the long shadow cast by a single man. You're standing in the cold, damp streets of Germany in the early 1920s. Shop windows are empty, coal is scarce, and bellies rumble with the same hunger gnawing at the soul of a wounded nation. You catch the faint, acrid smell of coal smoke, curling from chimneys so faint it's almost mocking, because you know most chimneys in your neighborhood stay cold. Men with hollow eyes hunch against the wind. Women queue for bread with ration cards clutched like lifelines. The war is over, but its claws haven't let go. And you probably won't survive this if you expect a happy bedtime fairy tale. Before we begin, a little favor: tap subscribe and give us a thumbs up to help our bedtime story family grow. Now snuggle in and let tonight's story guide you softly into a night full of calm and beautiful dreams. I'd love to know where you are in the world right now and what time it is. Drop it in the comments. Or if you'd rather share how you're feeling this evening, a worry, a hope, even a half-formed thought, it's welcome here. Take a slow, deep breath, settle into your favorite spot, and let the gentle rhythm of this story carry you far from today's worries. You trudge through Germany's cobbled streets, still bruised from the Treaty of Versailles. Inflation isn't just bad, it's surreal. People push wheelbarrows full of banknotes to buy bread. Children use worthless marks as wallpaper for dollhouses. Historians still argue whether the economic punishment of Versailles was meant to hobble Germany forever or simply satisfy the victor's anger. Either way it works. Pride is gone. Hunger is here. A young man named Adolf Hitler drifts into this chaos like a ragged ghost. He isn't from here, not exactly. Born in Austria, he fought in the German army during the Great War, earning an Iron Cross, but little else. In the peacetime collapse, he's just another ex-soldier, without a job, sleeping in flophouses, gnawing at resentment, like an old bone. He speaks of betrayal, of a stab in the back delivered by politicians, and in his twisted view by Jews. It's an ugly whisper, but in hungry times ugly whispers carry. You pass beer halls in Munich where smoke curls up like ghost fingers and the air is thick with beer sweat and shouts. Inside, ex-soldiers and nationalists bang mugs on tables as Hitler's voice rises above the din. His sentences whip and curl, each syllable sharpened by desperation. He talks about restoring German pride, ripping up Versailles, and finding scapegoats for the suffering. His eyes lock on people, like he's reading their pain aloud. A quirky tidbit. At first, his dramatic hand gestures aren't natural. They're rehearsed. He actually practices them in front of a mirror, shaping his body into the punctuation marks for his speeches. The bitterness in the air isn't just his. You can taste it on every street corner. Small shopkeepers glare at anyone they suspect of foreign competition. Politicians flail, promising stability but delivering more chaos. You overhear neighbors debating whether democracy is a luxury they can no longer afford. And in the back of every conversation, the same refrain: we need someone strong. You watch Hitler join the German Workers' Party, a tiny political group with big ideas but no real power. He becomes their loudest voice, their best draw. His words are fire in a tinderbox. He discovers something important. Fear is a more reliable unifier than hope. Fear makes people lean in. Fear makes people follow. Historians still argue whether Hitler truly believed every poisonous word, or if he simply learned how to weaponize the grievances around him. By night, you wander past the train station and see soldiers home from the front medals pinned to uniforms that no longer fit eyes staring at something you can't see. The Weimar Republic is like a tightrope walker on a fraying rope, swaying with every gust of political and economic crisis. And down below, Hitler is quietly laying out a safety net, woven not from compassion, but from a promise of revenge. That's how you first meet him, not as a dictator, not yet even a political giant, but as a voice in a smoky room telling the humiliated they could be great again, and pointing a trembling finger at the people he swore were standing in the way. It's an idea that will grow sharper, darker, and far more dangerous than anyone here tonight can imagine. You settle deeper into your chair as the cold Munich night clings to the city, and the sound of rowdy laughter and clinking mugs spills out from the low-lit beer halls. The air is thick with pipe smoke, stale beer, and that peculiar mix of hope and bitterness that only exists in a country on its knees. Inside wooden tables are stained from decades of spilled drink, the walls sweating under the press of bodies. You find a seat in the corner close enough to see the man everyone has been talking about, the one who makes the air in the room feel different. Adolf Hitler stands at the center, not on a grand stage, but on a table someone hastily cleared. He isn't commanding, yet his suit is rumpled, his hair slicked in a way that looks more desperate than dignified. But when he speaks, the room stills. The voice is sharp-clipped and rising with an almost musical rhythm. You catch fragments: betrayal, humiliation, rebirth. The crowd leans forward like plants towards sunlight, except the light here is fire. You watch his face twist with emotion as he rails against the Treaty of Versailles, calling it a betrayal that reduced a proud nation to a beggar's shell. His rhetoric is seasoned with half-truths and outright lies, but in a room of men who've lost brothers in the war, it feels like gospel. Historians still argue whether his hatred was already fully formed, or if it fermented here night after night, nourished by the applause and cheers of the disillusioned. A quirky detail slips into your observation. Hitler often drank little during these beer hall sessions. While others swilled beer by the litre, he sipped mineral water, preferring to keep his head sharp and his voice steady. The performance mattered more than the party. And make no mistake, it was a performance. He worked the room like a seasoned actor, drawing bursts of applause, timing his pauses to the pounding of fists on tables. The beer hall regulars, veterans, shopkeepers, unemployed workers begin to repeat his lines as if they were their own thoughts. You overhear snippets outside the next morning, men retelling the speech in the market square with the same fervor. Propaganda in its rawest form doesn't need a printing press. It just needs a storyteller and an audience willing to be told what they already want to believe. In these smoky rooms, the German Workers' Party starts to feel like more than a curiosity. They talk about rebuilding the nation, protecting the true Germans, finding scapegoats to punish for the nation's collapse. And here, you begin to see the true brutality not in fists or weapons yet, but in the casual way human dignity is stripped away with words. You can almost feel the walls of the beer hall lean inward, holding in the heat of something dangerous. By late evening, you step outside into the freezing air. The cobblestones are slick with frost, and the moon hangs low over Munich like a tired lantern. In the stillness, the echoes of the speech cling to you. You imagine the words slipping under doors, seeping into the minds of men who will carry them to factories, schools, and barracks. One man's fury multiplied. Some patrons stumble home laughing. Others walk away, silent faces tight with thought. You can't help but notice that the quiet ones look the most convinced. The jokes about foreigners, the muttered slurs about Jews, all of it weaving into everyday conversation as naturally as talking about the weather. This is how brutality germinates in beer-stained corners in the slow, deliberate erosion of empathy. And yet most in the city still see Hitler as little more than a loudmouth with a knack for stirring up a crowd. If you warned them about what was to come, they'd probably laugh and buy you another beer. But the seeds are planted, and under the right storm, they will grow into something that no one can uproot without blood and ruin. The days bleed into one another in Munich, the city wearing its winter coat of grey skies and thin, biting wind. You find yourself pulled again toward the smoky warmth of the beer halls. But this time, the air is different, tense, as if everyone knows. They're here for something more dangerous than just a round of drinks. Tonight the whispers aren't about the price of bread or the latest political scandal. They're about action. You slip inside and the wooden doors close behind you like a vault sealing shut. The room hums with anticipation. Hitler stands near the front, his jaw set his words tighter than before. He speaks of destiny, of the need to strike now, while the government is weak of seizing control before Germany is lost forever. The idea is intoxicating to those crushed under the weight of economic ruin and national humiliation. Historians still argue whether Hitler truly believed his tiny movement could topple the Weimar Republic in one swift blow, or if his gamble was born purely from desperation and arrogance. The plan, you soon learn, is bold and absurd in equal measure. They will march on the city, seize government leaders, and declare a national revolution. All of this will happen with a few hundred armed men and the sheer force of conviction. You watch as the crowd roars approval, the clinking of beer mugs turning into the clatter of boots and weapons being checked under tables. It's here you catch a quirky detail that feels almost like satire. Some of these would-be revolutionaries are wearing mismatched military uniforms from the Great War, patched together like a costume department after a clearance sale. One man has his medals pinned crookedly over a civilian jacket. Another carries an old rifle with no ammunition, insisting it will still scare the enemy. The mood is half soldier, half theatre troupe, and yet the determination in their eyes is chilling. The night of the beer hall putsch comes cold and clear moonlight splintering on the frozen cobblestones. You're swept up in the movement of bodies, hundreds marching in ragged formation, flags unfurling in the icy wind. The air smells of leather and gun oil. There's singing, shouting, a kind of fever that wraps around the heart and makes men forget common sense. They move toward the city centre, expecting to find the people rising to join them. But reality is colder than the night. The police are waiting. Barricades block the streets, rifles glinting under gas lamps. What was meant to be a triumphant march turns into a standoff. Then gunfire. You hear the sharp crack echo of stone buildings, the screams as men fall, the chaos of boots scrambling for cover. You press yourself into a doorway as bullets snap past. It's over almost before it began. Hitler flees, his arm dislocated in the confusion, and hides in a friend's home. You can almost picture him pacing in the shadows, the weight of failure pressing down like the cold outside. Within days he's arrested. The newspapers call the putsch a pathetic farce, a drunken misadventure that proves Hitler's irrelevance. Many believe it's the end of his political life. You can't help but think if only they'd been right. He's put on trial, but instead of crumbling under the charges of treason, Hitler uses the courtroom as his stage. His voice, now free from the beer hall's smoky haze, reaches every corner of Germany through the press. He spins defeat into a heroic stand, a momentary setback in the noble fight to save the nation. You realize as you sit in the back of that courtroom that the real danger isn't the march that failed. It's the story he's telling about it. The bullets may have stopped the putsch, but they haven't stopped the idea. And for ideas like his, the most fertile soil is humiliation watered with rage. The prison at Landsberg is quiet in the early mornings, its stone walls holding the chill of Bavarian winters like an old grudge. You shuffle past iron gates, the air thick with that damp metallic smell of places built to outlast the people inside. Here, Adolf Hitler is not pacing a beer hall, not marching down a cobblestone street. He is an inmate prisoner number 45, tucked away from the chaos he tried and failed to ignite. And yet, you sense something unsettling. He does not wear the face of a defeated man. If anything, his expression suggests relief, as though the world has finally given him the one thing he's been craving time. Historians still argue whether his prison term was a punishment or an unintended gift. In here, without the noise of politics or the grind of daily survival, Hitler begins to shape his ideas into something more lasting. He sits at a wooden desk in his cell, scratching ink across pages with an almost manic focus. You peek over his shoulder, dangerous but irresistible, and see the first lines of Mein Kampf take shape. It's not a manifesto in the casual sense. It's a fever dream laid out in tidy German script. National rebirth, racial purity, the destruction of enemies both foreign and domestic. The anti-Semitism is not implied, it is carved into the book's very bones. He writes of his life, his political philosophy, his vision for Germany, all wrapped in the belief that history has chosen him. Here's your quirky tidbit for the evening. Landsberg prison was far from a medieval dungeon. Hitler's cell had a bed, a table, and even flowers sent by supporters. He could receive visitors. He dined better than many poor Germans on the outside. In the afternoons, he took walks in the prison yard chain, smoking cigarettes, while dictating chapters to Rudolf Hess, who acted as his secretary. This was not punishment. It was a writer's retreat with locked doors. Outside the prison walls, Germany limps along, still wrestling with hyperinflation and political instability. Inside, Hitler refines his public persona. He stops being just a noisy agitator and becomes, at least in his own mind, a visionary statesman in waiting. You can almost hear the click of gears in his head working out how to turn the next failure into the next opportunity. Historians still debate the sincerity of some of his autobiographical passages. Did he truly believe he was destined for greatness, or was it all a carefully constructed myth to sell both himself and his ideology? Either way, the narrative is intoxicating to him most of all. The failed coup is recast not as a humiliation, but as a bold step on the road to power. The trial becomes a badge of honor. Prison becomes a place of prophecy. You imagine him sealing the last page with a flourish, convinced the book will outlive the man. He is right. Mein Kampf will become more than a manifesto. It will be a roadmap, one that millions will later follow into darkness. When Hitler walks out of Landsberg after just 9 months, his sentence reduced for good behavior, the world outside has already changed. The economy is stabilizing slightly, the political climate less volatile. But you feel the tremor underfoot. The man walking through those gates is not the same one who entered. He now carries a blueprint for power, a sharpened sense of how to manipulate crowds, and the smug certainty that destiny is still on his side. And you know that the brutality hasn't even begun. You trail him through the streets of Munich on the day of his release. The city looks almost gentle under a pale spring sun, but the air has that restless hum. You've come to recognize a readiness to be stirred. Hitler walks briskly, his thin frame wrapped in a dark overcoat, his hair combed with more care than before. The prison months have not softened him. They've distilled him like liquor left too long in the cask. He carries himself now not as a failed revolutionary, but as a man convinced that fate simply pressed the pause button. The Nazi party he left behind was in shambles, scattered, demoralized, under government suspicion. Yet within weeks, you watch him begin the slow work of re-knitting the torn fabric. He meets with former comrades in back rooms, not beer halls this time. The tone is calmer, the strategy clearer. No more wild street uprisings, he insists. From now on, power will be taken legally on paper, in offices through elections. Historians still argue whether this shift was genuine wisdom, or just a tactical disguise to keep the police at bay until the time was right. A quirky detail surfaces during these meetings. Hitler begins holding them in well-lit rooms with flowers on the tables, deliberately breaking the image of the rabble-rousing extremist. He even softens his suits, swapping the sharp militaristic style for something closer to what a respectable politician might wear. It's a calculated image rehabilitation. You realize he's no longer content to be the loudest man in the tavern. He's auditioning for the role of Chancellor. The Germany he's stepping back into is wobbling between relief and anxiety. The worst of the hyperinflation has eased, but unemployment and resentment still fester. You overhear conversations in markets about that man, Hitler said, with either cautious admiration or wary dismissal. The Nazis start producing sleek propaganda leaflets, carefully worded to appeal to struggling shopkeepers, veterans and farmers. Their message is simple: we understand your suffering, and we know who's to blame. In public speeches, Hitler now paces himself like a man training for a marathon. The fury is still there, but it's wrapped in layers of reasoned argument, statistics often manipulated, and promises of stability. The audience hears less about storming government buildings and more about protecting German values, restoring economic pride, and standing firm against corrupting influences. The brutality is still in the script, but now it's disguised as housekeeping. One evening, you attend a rally where the crowd spills into the streets, pressed shoulder to shoulder beneath fluttering swastika banners. The air is damp with drizzle street lamps turning the wet cobblestones into mirrors. A brass band plays upbeat marches before Hitler arrives, the cheer of the music masking the undercurrent of menace. When he steps onto the platform, he's met with a roar. He speaks for nearly 2 hours without notes, his voice rising and falling like a conductor's baton, leaving the crowd breathless. You can see his confidence grow with each rally. This is no longer the small-time agitator of the early 1920s. This is a man learning to scale his influence to feed on the energy of thousands instead of dozens. He moves the party headquarters into larger offices, recruits young, disciplined followers, and begins shaping the SA into a more intimidating street presence. Historians often debate this period. Was Hitler biding his time, playing the long game from the moment he left Landsberg? Or was he genuinely reshaping himself into a politician who believed in legal ascension? The question lingers in your mind as you watch him shake hands with respectable businessmen one day and wink at uniformed toughs the next. He's walking 2 paths at once, each feeding the other. And all the while, the brutality sits just beneath the polished surface, waiting for the right crisis to tear away the mask. You drift through Berlin's bustling streets in the mid-1920s, where the city hums like an electrical current. Bright lights, crowded cafes, music tumbling out of dance halls. It's the kind of energy that should make people forget politics for a night. But if you listen closely, you can hear something else beneath the jazz and clinking glasses, the steady beat of a new, well-oiled propaganda machine. Hitler has learned a crucial lesson. Words spoken in a beer hall can stir 100 men, but words broadcast, printed and plastered can grip an entire nation. You follow him into the cramped offices of Joseph Goebbels, the newly appointed propaganda chief, a man with sharp eyes and an even sharper pen. Together, they turn every speech, every photograph, every gesture into a weapon. Historians still argue whether Goebbels was the true genius behind Nazi propaganda or merely the perfect amplifier for Hitler's vision. Either way, the effect is chilling. You notice the walls lined with poster designs, bold red backgrounds, stark black swastikas, stylized images of strong-jawed workers and noble soldiers. The slogans are short, punchy, impossible to ignore. Hitler's image begins appearing everywhere on leaflets, in illustrated pamphlets, even in children's magazines. The quirky thing, many of these early portraits are subtly retouched. His features softened, his stance made more confident, because even dictators in waiting benefit from a bit of airbrushing. The new weapon of choice isn't just the printing press, it's the radio. You stand in a cramped Berlin flat one evening, watching a family huddle around a boxy wooden receiver as Hitler's voice crackles through the static. It's strange, his words sound calmer over the airwaves, but the rhythm, the repetition still hooks the listener. You can almost see the invisible thread pulling them closer. Radio erases the need for him to be everywhere in person. Now he can step directly into homes. Out on the streets, you walk past newsstands, where every headline seems to lead back to the same themes: betrayal, renewal, unity. The repetition is no accident. Goebbels understands that ideas don't need to be fresh. They need to be familiar, comforting in their predictability, like the chorus of a song you can't get out of your head. But the real artistry lies in how they weave entertainment into politics. The rallies are becoming grander productions with torches, music, and choreographed marches. You attend one in Nuremberg, where the crowd seems to move as a single organism, every cheer perfectly timed. The air smells of smoke and damp earth, the orange glow of torchlight flickering across faces upturned in rapture. It's theatre masquerading as patriotism, and the performance is almost hypnotic. There's a strange thing you can't ignore outside these rallies. Daily life in Germany feels like two worlds at once. In cabarets and cafes, people laugh, dance, and debate art. In newspapers and street corners, the Nazi voice grows louder, inching toward the center of political life. It's as if the country is carrying on a normal conversation, while in the background someone is quietly sharpening a knife. Historians still debate whether the public saw through the propaganda at this stage or genuinely believed it. Some surely recognized the danger. Others likely thought it was harmless theatre. But you can feel the shift. Hitler is no longer just a man with a message. He's becoming the message, the symbol around which discontent can gather. And in the glow of the posters, the hiss of the radio, and the roar of the rallies, you realize the brutality is no longer just whispered in beer halls. It's being broadcast, celebrated, and normalized, one perfect slogan at a time. You're standing in the marbled corridors of the Reich Chancellery, the air smelling faintly of polished wood and stale cigars. It's January the 30th, 1933. Hitler is about to be sworn in as Chancellor of Germany. The moment feels oddly subdued at first. No thunderous drums, no torch-lit procession. Just the polite shuffling of officials in press suits, the kind who think they've outsmarted fate. Historians still argue whether President Hindenburg truly believed he could control Hitler, or if he simply underestimated the danger in letting him inside the palace. The logic of the day went something like this: give the noisy little man a desk, a title, and a taste of responsibility, and he'll either behave or be easy to topple. You can almost hear history laughing in the background. A quirky little detail. On the day of his appointment, Hitler wore a plain suit, not the military garb you might expect, and no hat, in contrast to most men of his generation. It was deliberate. He wanted to look like a serious statesman, not a street corner agitator. He smiled slightly for the cameras, the image of restraint. Outside, however, the mood is electric. Crowds jam Wilhelmstrasse, craning their necks for a glimpse of the new chancellor. The brown-shirted SA mingle with civilians, handing out leaflets and shouting slogans. A brass band plays patriotic tunes, and in the cold air, the sound carries far. You weave through the mass, catching fragments of conversation, relief, suspicion, excitement, unease. It's all there tangled together in the soundscape of a nation pivoting towards something it doesn't yet fully see. But from the moment Hitler steps into that office, he begins rearranging the chessboard. Cabinet positions are filled with loyalists, or at least with men too weak to resist. Meetings stretch into the night smoke curling toward the chandeliers, while strategies are whispered over piles of paperwork. The Nazi press machine works overtime to frame Hitler's rise as the start of Germany's rebirth. Every photograph shows him upright, purposeful, confident. You attend one of his first public speeches as Chancellor. The venue is packed, the banners enormous, the lighting carefully staged. His words are a careful mix, calls for unity, promises to restore order, warnings about the enemies within. The applause rolls over you like waves. The brutality is not in the promises themselves, not yet, but in the way those promises are built on erasing whole communities from the definition of Germany. At street level, the SA are emboldened. You see them patrolling in pairs or small groups, strutting in brown uniforms, their boots loud against the cobblestones. They break up meetings of political opponents, rough up critics, and make sure newspapers toe the new party line. The intimidation is calculated not a flood, but a steady drip, meant to soak into everyday life until it feels normal. Historians still debate whether Hitler's opponents could have stopped him in these early months. Some argue that a decisive push from the left or the right could have toppled his fragile coalition. Others say his grip on the narrative was already too strong. What you know walking those streets is that each day he stays in power, the ground under your feet feels less stable. The corridors of the Reich Chancellery remain polished and quiet. But beyond those walls, the gears of a much darker machine have begun to turn. The winter air in Berlin bites at your cheeks as you weave through Wilhelmstrasse. It's late February 1933, and the city seems on edge. Nervous whispers in cafes, police patrols moving with more purpose, the smell of coal smoke hanging low. You can't shake the feeling that something is about to break. That night flames leap into the sky. You see them first as an orange flicker on the horizon, then as a roaring glow spilling across the rooftops. The Reichstag, the grand parliament building symbol of democracy itself, is on fire. You hurry closer, coughing as the smoke thickens the air, heavy with the stink of burning timber and scorched paper. Fire brigades swarm the scene, their hoses hissing, but the blaze is already eating the heart of the building. In the chaos, rumors spread faster than the fire. A lone arsonist, a communist plot, a Nazi false flag. Historians still argue over the truth, debating whether the blaze was an opportunistic accident or a carefully staged excuse. What matters in the moment is how quickly Hitler seizes the opportunity. By morning, the newspapers scream of communist treachery. The language is sharp, panicked, designed to strip away hesitation. The government announces emergency measures. The Reichstag fire decree, suspending civil liberties temporarily. Freedom of the press, the right to assemble, privacy of correspondence, all gone in a single legal stroke. Police can now arrest without warrant search, without cause. Silence, without trial. A quirky detail you pick up from the corridors of power. The draft of this decree was ready within hours of the fire, as if it had been waiting in a desk drawer for just such a spark. Whether that's chilling coincidence or meticulous planning, you can decide for yourself. Walking the streets in the days that follow, you notice the difference immediately. Opposition party offices are raided, leaders arrested, meetings banned. Posters warn citizens about traitors hiding in plain sight. SA men grinning under their caps patrol the neighborhoods like they own them. You pass an old bookseller who quietly tells you he's hiding anything suspicious in his back room, meaning any book critical of the Nazis. Public fear is a currency now, and Hitler spends it lavishly. In speeches, he frames himself as the only man who can protect Germany from the chaos supposedly lurking just beyond the door. The fire becomes not just an event, but a mythic turning point told and retold as proof that extreme measures are justified. You begin to realize the brilliance and the cruelty of it. The Reichstag fire isn't just about burning a building, it's about burning away the last protections people thought they had. The law itself has been hollowed out and refilled with something unrecognizable. Berlin still bustles, but it's a different kind of movement now, more cautious eyes, darting before voices speak. You feel it in yourself too, the subtle calculation before saying anything aloud. The brutality here isn't in mass executions or bombings. It's in the quiet shift, the creeping fear that makes ordinary people start policing themselves before the state even has to. The embers of the Reichstag cool, but the heat they've unleashed will not fade. The summer air is heavy with the scent of linden trees, but the streets of Berlin carry a different perfume, fear and ambition. It's June 1934, and you've been hearing the rumors for weeks. The SA Hitler's own brown-shirted stormtroopers have grown restless. Their leader Ernst Röhm is pushing for a second revolution, a deeper shake-up of society that threatens the fragile alliances Hitler has built with the army, business leaders and conservative elites. You watch from the corner of a cafe terrace as SA men swagger past their boots loud against the cobblestones. They've always been brash, but now there's something more in their stride, a dangerous self-assurance. Röhm, broad-shouldered and self-styled as untouchable, openly criticizes the compromises Hitler has made since taking power. Historians still argue whether Röhm genuinely believed he could bend Hitler to his will, or if he simply underestimated the ruthlessness of his old comrade. A quirky little detail, Röhm's arrogance showed in small ways. He often attended official meetings wearing his SA uniform half-buttoned, sometimes without a tie, as if to signal he was too important for formalities. Hitler tolerated it in public, but you could see the tightness around his jaw. By late June, the tension is almost a living thing in the air. Hitler invites Röhm and other top SA leaders to a meeting at a lakeside resort in Bad Wiessee. You follow the motorcade into the Bavarian countryside past rolling hills and quiet villages. The calm is deceptive. Early on June 30th, Hitler bursts into Röhm's room flanked by armed SS men. The SA leader blinks in disbelief, barely dressed, as Hitler shouts accusations of treason. He's arrested on the spot. What follows is a purge so swift and surgical it feels unreal. Across Germany, SA officers are rounded up. Political enemies, some within the Nazi Party itself, are arrested or executed without trial. The code name for this cleansing is bland enough: Operation Hummingbird. The public will come to know it by a darker name: the Night of the Long Knives. You stand at the edge of an airfield as transport planes unload squads of SS men in black uniforms. Their orders are sealed envelopes opened only after takeoff. You catch fragments, addresses, names, and the grim instruction to take no prisoners. Historians still debate the exact death toll. Official numbers claimed under 100. Some scholars argue it was 3 times that. The truth lies buried with the bodies. A strange calm falls over Berlin in the purge's aftermath. Newspapers under strict control frame the killings as a necessary defense against a coup. The army, relieved at the SA's downfall, pledges loyalty to Hitler, personally swearing oaths not to Germany, but to the man himself. This is the moment when dictatorship stops being a possibility and becomes a fact. You walk through Wilhelmstrasse days later and notice the shift in posture. Hitler's ministers move with more confidence. The SA, stripped of its leadership, now marches in tighter, more obedient formation. And the SS, tall, black-clad, deliberate, seem to have grown in both number and shadow. The brutality here isn't just in the killings. It's in the message they send. Loyalty to Hitler is absolute, and survival depends on staying useful. The purges weren't just about removing rivals, they were about rewriting the unspoken rules of power. The summer linden blossoms still sweeten the air, but every time you breathe in, you taste iron underneath. The heat of late summer settles over Nuremberg like a heavy velvet curtain. You join the crowds flooding into the city for the annual Nazi Party rally, a spectacle so elaborate it could make a Broadway producer blush. The air smells of trampled grass and torch fuel, the hum of anticipation thick as syrup. The main parade ground stretches before you like some vast theatrical stage. Towering banners ripple in the warm breeze, blood red with the black on white swastika stark against the sky. Loudspeakers mounted on steel poles crackle to life with martial music, the rhythm matching the thud of boots as regiment after regiment marches past. It's not just a rally, it's an engineered experience. Historians still argue whether the Nuremberg rallies were primarily political tools, or quasi-religious rituals designed to bind the crowd into a single obedient organism. Standing here, you suspect it's both. The choreography is precise to the point of obsession. Hitler doesn't just arrive, he emerges stepping into a floodlight that makes his pale face the sole point of brightness in a sea of shadow. A quirky detail catches your eye, the way each torchbearer holds the flame at exactly the same angle, as if they've rehearsed not just the march, but the tilt of their wrists. Even the smallest gestures are orchestrated. When Hitler begins to speak, the silence is total. His voice is measured, at first almost conversational, before swelling into crescendos that send shivers through the warm night air. He speaks of unity, destiny, and the glorious future of a reborn Germany. But woven between the soaring rhetoric are the familiar threads of menace, warnings about enemies within, about racial purity, about strength through discipline. The crowd reacts in perfect unison, as if cued by an invisible conductor. Cheers rise like waves, armed salutes snapping up in thousands. From where you stand, the sea of raised hands is both mesmerizing and deeply unsettling. You can almost feel the moment when individuality dissolves into collective identity, the point at which people stop thinking and simply join. The rallies aren't just for the faithful, they're for the cameras. Film crews scurry like ants across the grandstands, capturing angles that will later be edited into propaganda films by Leni Riefenstahl. These images will travel far beyond Nuremberg, distilling the scale and fervor into something that feels eternal, inevitable. Outside the main grounds, the mood lingers in every tavern and park. Vendors sell miniature swastika flags to children. Uniformed youths sing party songs in the streets. You overhear one boy telling another he wants to be in the SS when he grows up, as if it were no different from wanting to be a firefighter. That's the quiet triumph of this theatre. It seeps into daily life until it feels normal. Historians often note how these rallies acted as emotional conditioning, training the population to respond to Hitler's presence with instinctive loyalty. The rallies aren't merely events. They're rehearsals for a future in which obedience is reflex. By the time you leave Nuremberg, the city's torches have burned down to embers. But the after-image of the spectacle, those endless rows of saluting arms, follows you into the night like a ghost you can't quite shake. The autumn wind whips through Berlin's streets, carrying with it a sharp scent of wood smoke and wet leaves. Shop windows are decorated for the season, but a closer look shows something darker. Rows of empty Jewish-owned storefronts, shutters locked tight. Their names, once painted in elegant script, are now smeared with crude graffiti. You pause before one window glass spider-webbed from a recent blow. Inside, dust already gathers on shelves that used to hold fine china. It's November 1938, and the city is bracing for what will be remembered as Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass. But the persecution didn't start tonight. For years now, the Nazi government has passed a steady stream of laws, stripping Jews of rights one nibble at a time. Historians still argue whether this slow erosion was meant to prepare the public for what was coming, or if it evolved as Nazi confidence grew. Either way, the effect is the same. Most people hardly notice when the latest restriction becomes law. A quirky, unsettling detail: some of the anti-Semitic shop signs are printed professionally, not hastily scrawled. They're meant to look spontaneous, but you recognize the work of organized hands. The state isn't just tolerating prejudice, it's choreographing it. In the days leading up to Kristallnacht, the atmosphere grows thick with tension. Newspapers scream about supposed Jewish crimes, radio broadcasts churn out venom. Then, late on November 9th, news breaks that a German diplomat has been shot in Paris by a young Jewish man. The Nazi leadership seizes on it instantly. The retaliation they claim will be spontaneous outrage. You walk the streets as the night erupts. Shouts pierce the darkness, glass shatters in sharp burst, flames lick at synagogue rooftops. SA men and Hitler youth move in tight, purposeful groups, swinging clubs, hurling stones. In one alley, a shopkeeper tries to shield his doorway, but is thrown into the gutter. Passers-by hurry past, eyes averted, as if politeness could make the scene invisible. By dawn, the scale is staggering. Hundreds of synagogues burned, thousands of Jewish businesses destroyed, homes ransacked, nearly 100 people killed. Tens of thousands are arrested and sent to concentration camps, not yet death camps, but the cruelty is plain. You watch trucks loaded with arrested men rumble out of the city, their faces pale in the cold morning light. The official line blames public anger, but the coordination is obvious. You overhear a policeman admitting in a low voice that they'd been ordered not to interfere. The brutality here is as much about the permission granted as the violence itself. The state has said plainly and publicly that this is allowed. After Kristallnacht, daily life for Jews in Germany shrinks to a narrow, dangerous path. Bank accounts are frozen, insurance claims denied, property seized. Children are expelled from schools. You pass one Jewish family in a park sitting quietly on a bench, as if trying to savor a few last moments of normalcy. The father stares straight ahead. The mother's eyes dart at every sound, the child tracing patterns in the dirt with a stick. Historians still debate whether the German public approved of Kristallnacht or simply learned to keep silent in its wake. What you know is that silence has its own kind of complicity. And as you walk away from another smashed shopfront, the crunch of broken glass underfoot feels like a language you wish you didn't understand. The clang of steel on steel rings out from the sprawling industrial yards along the Ruhr. Sparks burst from welding torches, showering the shop floor in golden rain. Inside these factories, men in grease-stained overalls work with a kind of grim purpose. They're not just repairing farm tools or building railway parts anymore, they're rearming Germany. It's the mid-1930s, and the transformation is impossible to miss. Military production hums day and night, as if the war that supposedly ended in 1918 is just taking a long breath before starting again. Tanks roll off assembly lines under tarps. Artillery barrels are loaded onto flat cars at night. Historians still argue whether the rearmament was purely a calculated violation of the Treaty of Versailles, or if it was also driven by Hitler's personal obsession with military might. A quirky detail: you notice some factories hide their war output behind innocuous facades. An aircraft plant in southern Germany claims to be producing commercial gliders for sport pilots. Never mind that those gliders can be fitted with engines in a matter of hours. You catch a glimpse of workers painting cheerful logos on crates meant for export, even though everyone knows they'll never leave the country. It isn't just the machines that are changing, it's the people. The Hitler Youth swells in number, their ranks filled with boys in crisp uniforms, learning to march to shoot, to chant party slogans in perfect unison. On weekends, you see them cycling through villages in tight formation, their faces flushed with pride. Girls, too, are drafted into the ideological machine, trained in the Bund, Deutsche Mädel, to become mothers for the Reich. On parade days, Berlin's wide boulevards turn into rivers of soldiers' boots, pounding the pavement, bayonets glinting under the sun. The crowd cheers as if the army had never been disbanded. The brutality here is still subtle, but it's there in the way a society is being reshaped into a war engine before your eyes. You overhear a conversation in a cafe between two middle-aged men. One marvels at how unemployment has plummeted, how the economy seems to be roaring back to life. The other lowers his voice. Yes, but look where the jobs are. The truth is that Germany's recovery is lashed to the prow of a warship that hasn't even left harbour yet. Hitler's speeches frame the build-up as self-defense. Germany will never again be weak, he declares, his voice crackling over the radio in kitchens and pubs. He invokes the humiliation of Versailles like an old wound, pressing it until the nation winces and nods. The unspoken message is clear: strength comes from steel, and steel comes from obedience. Historians still debate whether the average German truly grasped the scale of what was happening. Many were too relieved by full dinner tables and the hum of factories to question the destination of all this industry. Others surely knew, but convinced themselves, that rearmament was just insurance, a safeguard against foreign threats. But as you watch a new Luftwaffe squadron roar overhead during a training exercise, their silver wings catching the afternoon light, you understand something unsettling. This isn't preparation for peace. This is the quiet drum roll before the march to war. The chill of September 1939 hangs over the train station as you watch soldiers in grey uniforms board carriages bound east. The air smells of coal smoke and damp wool. The platform a jumble of shouted farewells and clattering boots. Mothers press folded letters into their sons' hands. Fathers clap them on the shoulder with brittle smiles. Everyone knows where they're going, though few will say it aloud: Poland. The word blitzkrieg, lightning war, has just entered the world's vocabulary. You don't need a military map to understand it. You can feel it in the pace of events. Tanks rumble forward in tight formations. Aircraft dive from the clouds, artillery flashes in rapid rhythm. Historians still argue whether the strategy was born from bold innovation or sheer necessity. Either way, it works frighteningly well. A quirky detail strikes you as you move with the troops toward the border. Some of the German soldiers carry cameras snapping cheerful photographs of themselves beside signposts in occupied towns, as if this were a holiday outing. The war for them is still a novelty, an adventure wrapped in victory banners. The invasion is swift and brutal. You travel through Polish villages where houses smoulder and roads are choked with refugees, families dragging carts piled with bedding children, clutching ragged dolls. In the towns, the Nazi flag unfurls over government buildings with an almost ceremonial smoothness. you can't help noticing how quickly the occupation machinery clicks into place. German police on street corners, requisition orders nailed to doors, curfews announced by loudspeaker. Berlin reacts as if a great wrong has been righted. Crowds pour into the streets to cheer the returning troops. Newspapers trumpet restored German pride and historic justice. The propaganda paints the conquest not as aggression, but as liberation, of course, defined by the conqueror. And then comes the West. In the spring of 1940, you watch as Hitler turns the same lightning-fast assault toward Denmark and Norway, then to Belgium, the Netherlands and France. Each fall like dominoes, their defenses shattered before they can regroup. You find yourself on the Champs-Élysées, under the gaze of German soldiers, the Eiffel Tower framed by swastika banners. The city's usual perfume of bread and coffee is replaced by the smell of petrol and the rasp of German commands. The brutality here isn't just in the battles, it's in the speed, the shock, the way each conquered nation is absorbed almost before its people can comprehend what's happened. You overhear a Parisian baker mutter, "It's like waking up in someone else's house." Historians still debate whether Hitler's early string of victories made him reckless or merely confirmed his sense of destiny. Either way, the momentum is intoxicating for him, for his generals, for much of the German public. The streets of Berlin bloom with flowers for the soldiers. Shop windows fill with victory posters, and the radio hums with triumph. But you notice something else, something quieter. Letters home from the front grow less boastful. Soldiers write about long days, bad food, and nights filled with the sound of distant shelling. The lightning war is still young, but the shadows it casts are already long. And as you stand on a French street watching a German patrol pass, you realize the machine Hitler built is now fully in motion, and it's moving too fast for anyone to stop without shattering the world. The summer of 1941 stretches across the German countryside in gold and green, but the air buzzes with more than bees and warm breezes. Everywhere you turn, train stations, army depots, supply yards, you see the signs of a vast mobilization. Lines of freight cars groan under the weight of tanks and artillery. Soldiers in field grey uniforms lean against their rifles, smoking in clusters, their helmets tipped back to catch a bit of sun. Hitler is about to gamble on the largest military operation in history, Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. You've heard whispers for months, but now the scale is impossible to miss. 3 million German troops, thousands of aircraft, nearly 4,000 tanks, all aimed east. Historians still argue whether Hitler's decision was born from ideological obsession with destroying Bolshevism or from a strategic miscalculation of Soviet strength. A quirky detail catches your eye as you walk along one of the staging areas. Field kitchens are preparing enormous pots of pea soup with smoked sausage, the traditional soldier's comfort food. Men joke and trade cigarettes, as if the war ahead will be nothing more than another fast campaign like France. Some have painted cartoon mascots or girlfriends' names on their helmets as though heading to a football match rather than a meat grinder. On June 22nd, the eastern horizon erupts. Artillery thunders, dive bombers scream overhead, and the German army surges across the border. The first weeks are a blur of rapid advances. Soviet forces are caught unprepared, entire divisions encircled and captured. You stand on the edge of a dusty Ukrainian road, watching endless columns of Soviet prisoners march west under armed guard, their faces hollow with shock. Berlin greets the early victories with euphoric headlines and radio broadcasts promising a swift end to the campaign. But even as the Wehrmacht pushes deep into Soviet territory, you notice a darker undertone. Special units, the Einsatzgruppen, follow close behind the front lines. Their orders are not just to secure the rear, but to carry out mass shootings of Jews, communists, and other targeted groups. In forest clearings and ravines, the crack of rifle fire echoes long after the battle has moved on. The brutality here is no longer hidden behind euphemisms. Villages are torched as reprisals, partisans hanged as warnings. You pass one village where the well has been poisoned, the livestock slaughtered. Survivors move like ghosts among the ashes. The war in the East isn't just a military campaign. It's an ideological crusade that dehumanizes entire populations. By autumn, the speed begins to falter. The distances are vast, the roads muddy, the Soviet resistance stiffening. Supply lines stretch thin. Yet Hitler refuses to slow down, convinced that one final push will bring the Soviets to their knees. You see the frost forming on tent ropes in October, men wrapping themselves in blankets during morning briefings. No one talks about winter gear. They were told they wouldn't need it. Historians still debate whether this was arrogance or simple logistical failure. All you know standing in the cold air of a field headquarters is that the war Hitler promised would be over in months is already slipping into something far longer and far more costly. The golden summer is gone. Ahead lies snow ice and the kind of cold that kills faster than bullets. And somewhere deep in the Kremlin, Stalin is smiling grimly. Snow drifts over the steppe in thick swirling sheets, muffling the world into a pale, frozen silence. You stand ankle-deep in it on the outskirts of a small Russian village, your breath a thin white cloud in the air. The winter of 1941 Shid to 42 has arrived like an ambush, and the German army so confident just months ago is now staggering under its weight. Operation Barbarossa was supposed to be a swift campaign. Instead, it has slowed to a crawl, each kilometre eastward paid for in frostbite, starvation and blood. Men huddle in foxholes lined with straw, their hands wrapped in rags because proper gloves never came. Rifles jam in the cold. Engines seize. Even boiling water takes hours, and the moment it's poured into a tin cup, it freezes again. Historians still argue whether Hitler's refusal to prepare for a Russian winter was pure hubris or a catastrophic misreading of history. A strange, almost absurd detail catches your eye. Some soldiers have taken to wearing women's fur coats looted from villages over their uniforms. One man shuffles past you in a mink jacket that must have belonged to a ballerina, the hem dragging in the snow. Another has wrapped a floral scarf around his helmet. The absurdity doesn't hide the desperation. If anything, it underlines it. The Soviets, battered and bleeding, have found their footing. Fresh divisions, many from Siberia, pour into the fight, their white camouflage blending into the snow. You watch them counterattack outside Moscow, their T-34 tanks moving with surprising agility across frozen ground. The German advance halts, then bends backward. Behind the front lines, the brutality deepens. In occupied territories, the Nazi regime accelerates its genocidal plans. Ghettos swell with starving Jewish families. Deportations to extermination sites begin in earnest. Trains packed with human cargo roll east to camps like Chelmno, where resettlement is nothing but a euphemism for industrialized murder. You pass through a Ukrainian town where the Einsatzgruppen have recently cleared the ghetto. The silence is unnatural. Snow lies unbroken, except for faint depressions where bodies were dragged to mass graves. The stench, even in this bitter cold, clings to the air. A German officer, when asked about the scene, shrugs, as if commenting on the weather. Hitler back in Berlin demands that the army hold every inch of ground, even as commanders plead for strategic withdrawals. His speeches ignore the reality on the front, still promising ultimate victory. You listen to one broadcast in a drafty railway station, where frost gathers on the inside of the windows. A soldier next to you mutters under his breath. He's not the one freezing out here. Historians still debate whether the turning point of the war began here in the frozen ruins outside Moscow or later at Stalingrad. But you can feel something shifting. The aura of invincibility that carried Hitler through the first years of the war is cracking. The blitzkrieg glow is gone, replaced by the dull grind of attrition. The steppe winds howl through the night, rattling the shutters of the village huts. The snow keeps falling, burying the roads, the trenches, the dead. And somewhere under all that white, the seeds of Germany's defeat are taking root. You find yourself in the echoing marble halls of the Reich Chancellery in early 1943. But the mood here is no longer the confident hum of conquest. It's the brittle quiet of a gambler who's just lost his largest stake. Word has spread. Stalingrad has fallen. Over 90,000 German soldiers marched into Soviet captivity, and the rest lie frozen or buried in rubble. In Berlin, the news is dressed in euphemisms, heroic sacrifice, strategic realignment, but everyone knows what it means. Historians still argue whether Hitler's decision to hold Stalingrad at all costs was strategic obsession, or simply his inability to admit defeat. Either way, the loss has shaken the myth of Nazi invincibility. You walk past a dimly lit war room where maps are pinned with coloured flags. Officers speak in clipped, tense voices, shifting units that no longer exist on paper to plug gaps that no longer can be filled. Outside the building, the propaganda machine spins harder than ever. Posters promise Endsieg final victory, but the images look almost desperate now. The smiles too wide, the slogans too loud. A quirky detail slips into your memory in an effort to distract the public. The regime encourages victory concerts in Berlin. Orchestras play Beethoven and Wagner in packed halls, with audiences wrapped in overcoats because the heating has been cut to save fuel. The applause is thunderous, but it feels more like defiance than belief. Meanwhile, in the occupied territories, brutality takes on an even harder edge. Resistance movements are growing bolder. In France, partisans sabotage trains and ambush patrols. In Poland, the Warsaw Ghetto is a tinderbox waiting for a spark. Hitler responds with orders for mass reprisals. Whole villages burned, hostages shot. You visit one French hamlet 2 days after such a reprisal. Its stone cottages are nothing but blackened shells, the smell of charred timber mingling with the winter air. On the Eastern Front, retreat becomes the new reality. You travel with a column pulling back from the Don River wagons, creaking under the weight of the wounded. Horses stumble on icy roads, the occasional blast from Soviet artillery sending shivers through the column. Men wrap scarves over their faces, not just against the cold, but to hide expressions that might be seen as defeatist. In Berlin, Hitler retreats deeper into his own bubble. He spends hours dictating orders no one believes can be carried out. Historians still debate whether his increasing isolation was a symptom of deteriorating mental health, or simply the inevitable end of a man who ruled through fear and denial. In the quiet moments, you sense he's no longer trying to win the war in the conventional sense. He's trying to outlast the reality of losing it. The brutality now isn't the loud torch-lit kind. It's in the calculated cruelty of orders to fight to the last bullet, knowing exactly what that means for the men who receive them. It's in the destruction of places and people on the way out, ensuring that nothing usable is left for the enemy. And as you step into the Berlin night past the dim street lamps and shuttered shop fronts, you realize the war machine that once seemed unstoppable is grinding itself down to splinters still dangerous, but bleeding from every seam. The spring of 1945 hangs over Berlin. Like a bruised purple-grey skies the air thick with the smell of dust and smoke. The city is no longer the proud capital Hitler once paraded through in triumph. It's a ruin. Streets are cratered tram lines, sag like snapped shoelaces, and entire blocks stand as blackened skeletons. Every breath you take tastes faintly of plaster and char. The Red Army is closing in from the east, the Americans and British from the west. You can hear the rumble of Soviet artillery now not as distant thunder, but as a constant rhythmic pounding. Each impact sends shivers through the ground, loosening dust from ceilings. Historians still argue whether Hitler truly believed Berlin could hold out, or if he was simply unable to face the reality of surrender. Inside the Führerbunker, the air is stale, thick with cigarette smoke and the sour tang of unwashed uniforms. The walls sweat with condensation. Maps are still pinned up, but their neat-colored arrows no longer point toward conquest. They circle the city like a tightening noose. Hitler shuffles between the map room and his private quarters, his movements stiff, his face pale and bloated. The once thunderous voice is now a hoarse rasp punctuated by bursts of rage that leave aides frozen in place. A strange, almost absurd detail, the bunker kitchen still serves elaborate afternoon cakes and coffee when supplies allow, as if ritual could keep collapse at bay. In one corner, a gramophone plays a scratchy waltz. Over the distant thud of artillery, the sound oddly fragile against the weight of the war outside. Above ground, the city is choking. Civilians scavenge in rubble for firewood, and food pushing baby carriages not with infants, but with bundles of scrap. Children play in the wreckage of bombed-out buildings, their laughter brittle against the backdrop of destruction. The streets are crowded with wounded soldiers in makeshift bandages hobbling toward hospitals that are little more than overcrowded cellars. Hitler issues orders for phantom armies that exist only on paper, demanding counterattacks from units that have long since ceased to exist. His inner circle nods, takes notes, and quietly ignores the impossible commands. Historians still debate whether this was blind loyalty or a survival instinct, whether they believed in the man or simply feared him more than the enemy. The brutality now is in the hopelessness. Every man, woman, and child still in Berlin is a hostage to Hitler's refusal to surrender. Bridges are blown up to slow the Soviets trapping civilians inside the city. Any soldier caught trying to flee is executed as a deserter. The pounding grows louder each day. From the bunker stairwell, you can feel the shock waves travel through your bones. The city's days are numbered, and somewhere deep underground the man who once promised to remake the world paces like a caged animal staring at maps that have turned into death warrants. The days blur into one another in the Führerbunker. No sunrise, no sunset, just the constant hum of stale air and the muffled heartbeat of artillery overhead. Outside, Berlin is dissolving into dust. Soviet shells tear through apartment blocks. Flames leap across rooftops, and the streets are rivers of rubble. The smell is a bitter cocktail of smoke cordite and the damp metallic tang of blood. Hitler moves slower now, hunched his hands, trembling slightly as he shuffles from his private quarters to the map room. He refuses to leave the city. Historians still argue whether this was stubborn pride, a martyr fantasy, or a refusal to live in a world without the Reich. He rages at generals who no longer exist on the battlefield, demanding counter-offensives from armies that have been annihilated. In quieter moments, he slumps into his chair, eyes distant, as if listening to music only he can hear. A quirky, almost surreal detail. His beloved dog Blondie still follows him faithfully through the narrow corridors, her nails clicking on the concrete floor. She's one of the few creatures in the bunker to receive regular meals. On April 29th, the news reaches him. Mussolini is dead, strung up by his own people. You see the shadow pass over Hitler's face. He knows what comes next. That night in a small, dimly lit room, he marries Eva Braun. She wears a simple black dress, he a worn military tunic. The ceremony is brief, the champagne warm. Some guests force smiles, others stare at the floor. By the morning of April 30th, the Soviet artillery is so close that each blast rattles cups in their saucers. Hitler spends the morning in the map room, then retreats to his private quarters with Eva. The door closes softly. A single shot cracks through the bunker's stillness, startling even those who have been expecting it. Minutes later, aides enter to find Hitler slumped lifeless, the acrid scent of gunpowder in the air. Eva lies beside him, the faint almond smell of cyanide curling through the room. Historians still debate the precise details, whether he fired the shot himself or bit down on the cyanide first. But the outcome is the same. The warlord who once set half the world aflame ends his days in a concrete tomb beneath a dying city. His body is carried upstairs into the bomb-scarred garden, doused in petrol and set alight. The flames whip and sputter under the wind, black smoke curling against a sky streaked with falling shells. There is no grand funeral, no speeches, only the hurried cremation of a man who once demanded the world salute him. Outside the bunker, Berlin continues to die. Civilians huddle in cellars, the roar of Soviet tanks growing nearer. For them, Hitler's end is not a relief, yet it's simply another sound, lost in the endless noise of destruction. And just like that, the man who built a world on brutality becomes ash, scattered in the dirt of his own making. The guns are still for a moment now. The roar of engines, the crack of rifles, the chants of the rallies, all of it has faded into memory. You step out from the darkness of the bunker in your mind and feel the cool night air brush against your face. The city that once pulsed with shouts and boots now rests under a soft grey hush. Breathe in. There's no smoke here, no echoes of speeches, no banners snapping in the wind. Just the steady rhythm of your own heartbeat. The world has turned a page, as it always does, no matter how loud the chapter before it seemed. You let the streets of Berlin dissolve around you. The broken stones smooth out under your feet. The sky clears of artillery flashes. Imagine instead a quiet lane, somewhere far from history's roar. There's a warm light spilling from a small window ahead, the smell of bread drifting through the air. Inside there's a chair waiting for you, a blanket draped across it. The gentle tick of a clock marking only peaceful seconds. You sit, and the weight of all you've just witnessed slides from your shoulders. This was a story of noise and fury, of cruelty and command. But it's over now. Here in this quiet space, there is nothing left to chase you. Even the shadows have grown tired and gone to sleep. Let your breath slow. Feel your eyelids grow heavier. Somewhere far away, the world still spins, still struggles, still writes new stories. But not tonight. Tonight you can set it all down. The names, the battles, the flags, they can wait for another day. You are safe here. You are warm here. You are far from the crowds and the cold, far from the speeches and the marching feet. Let yourself drift, carried by the gentle tide of quiet, into a deep and untroubled sleep.